Put yourself in the Oval Office. Millions of people want in. The country is split between letting more people in and turning more people away. One decision can look like compassion or chaos. The other can look like security or cruelty. Protests, violence, and death are certain, no matter what you choose. The year was 1790, the country was new, and the Constitution was just written. The president at this time was George Washington, who put the first set of immigration laws into effect, limited to allowing free white persons. If you weren't considered white, you could live here, work here, even build a life here, but you couldn't become a citizen. You couldn't vote. You couldn't hold certain jobs. You couldn't fully participate in the political system. Citizenship wasn't automatic. It had to be granted, and the federal government controlled who qualified. At the time, immigration mostly came from Europe, so this system worked the way lawmakers expected. Irish, German, British immigrants, they fit the culture of America. This system worked at the time, but things started to change. The economy was growing, railroads were expanding, cities were booming, and workers were arriving who didn't fit the original mold. Chinese laborers began coming in large numbers during the mid-1800s, especially in California. They helped build railroads, they worked in mines, they filled labor shortages. But as the economy slowed and jobs became scarce, frustration grew. And now the workers we used for cheaper labor were no longer needed. And in 1892, Congress would pass a bill that would never even be considered today: the Chinese Exclusion Act. For the first time in American history, the federal government banned immigration from a specific nationality. Those already living in the United States were denied the right to become citizens. Families were separated. Men who had come alone for work were trapped between two countries, unable to bring wives or children over. Chinese communities became isolated, forming what would later be known as Chinatowns, partly out of necessity for protection. The law wasn't temporary. It was renewed and expanded multiple times, and it stayed in effect for over 60 years. More importantly, it set a precedent. The federal government now had clear authority to exclude entire groups of people based on race and nationality. Immigration only grew from here, meaning things got even crazier. By the early 1900s, immigration wasn't slowing down, but it wasn't just coming from Northern Europe anymore. Millions were arriving from Southern and Eastern Europe: Italians, Poles, Russians, Greeks, different languages, different religions, different customs, and once again, fear followed change. Newspapers warned of cultural decline. Politicians spoke about preserving American identity. The argument wasn't just about jobs anymore. It was about what the country was becoming. This caused Congress to act again, and the Immigration Act of 1924 was put in place, a law that created quotas. The number of immigrants allowed from each country was based on the U.S. population from decades earlier, when the country was overwhelmingly Northern and Western European. This resulted in Northern and Western Europe received generous quotas. Southern and Eastern Europe were drastically reduced. Asian immigration was almost entirely cut off. Immigration had moved from selective to strategic, and that system would define American immigration for the next 40 years, when the foundations of America would change forever. World War II had just exposed the consequences of racial ideology on a global scale. The civil rights movement was reshaping America from the inside, and suddenly a quota system built on nationality and quietly rooted in preserving ethnic balance didn't look defensible anymore. By the mid-1960s, pressure was building, and in 1965, Congress passed the Immigration and Nationality Act. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed it into law at the base of the Statue of Liberty. It ended the national quota system, no more favoring one part of Europe over another. Immigration boomed, and America was become more diverse than ever before. For some, this was proof the country was evolving. For others, it felt like change was happening too fast. And immigration slowly became one of the most politically charged issues in the country. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Congress tried to manage it. In 1986, the Immigration Reform and Control Act granted amnesty to millions of undocumented immigrants. but also increased border enforcement. In 1996, new laws expanded deportation categories and strengthened enforcement tools. The system was tightening, but it still wasn't ICE. That moment came from something else entirely, something much more unexpected. September 11th, 2001. Nearly 3,000 people killed, the country shaken. Suddenly, immigration wasn't just about labor markets or demographics. It was about national security, about vulnerability, about control. In the months after 9/11, the US government underwent the largest restructuring since World War II. In 2002, Congress passed the Homeland Security Act. 22 federal agencies were merged into one new department, the Department of Homeland Security. And in 2003, a new agency was formed under it, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. It wasn't created as a cultural symbol. It was created as a security response. Parts of the old Immigration and Naturalization Service were dissolved. Customs investigators were reorganized. Interior immigration enforcement was centralized. ICE was tasked with enforcing immigration law inside the United States, tracking visa overstays, investigating human trafficking networks, targeting transnational criminal organizations, carrying out deportations. The mission was enforcement. But enforcement doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in neighborhoods, in workplaces, in homes. And over time, ICE became more than an agency. It became the visible face of immigration enforcement itself. In 2018, everything changed. The Trump administration announced what it called a zero-tolerance policy at the southern border. The policy meant that every adult caught crossing the border illegally would be criminally prosecuted. No exceptions. On paper, it sounded like strict enforcement. In practice, it triggered something the country wasn't prepared for. When adults were prosecuted, children could not legally be held in federal criminal custody with them. So families were separated. Thousands of children were taken from their parents while cases moved through the courts. Images spread quickly. Detention facilities, chain link fencing, children sleeping under foil blankets. The reaction was immediate. Protests erupted across the country. Lawmakers demanded answers. Court cases followed. To supporters, this was enforcement finally being taken seriously. To critics, it crossed a moral line. And suddenly, ICE wasn't just enforcing law, it was the face of a national argument about humanity. Even though Border Patrol handled initial apprehensions, ICE became closely associated with detention and removal. But what most people don't understand is this: ICE became a political tool the media uses. Immigration enforcement didn't begin with one president. Under President Obama, deportations reached record highs during his first term. In fact, he was criticized by immigration advocates and nicknamed the Deporter-in-Chief. His administration focused heavily on removing individuals with criminal records and recent border crossers. Family detention facilities were used during the 2014 surge of unaccompanied minors from 1790 to 1882, from 1924 to 1965, from 9/11 to 2018. Immigration has never been a settled issue in America. It has always been tied to identity, to fear, to opportunity, to control. ICE didn't create that tension, it inherited it. It is the modern tool of a debate that has existed since the country was founded. Every president has faced it. Every administration has enforced it in some way. Some leaned harder into deportation. Some leaned harder into reform. But none escaped the consequences. Because immigration forces a nation to answer a difficult question. Who are we? And who gets to become one of us? ICE sits at the center of that question today. After watching this video, has your answer changed from the beginning? Let me know in the comments.